Going to go ahead and call this Whitefish City Council meeting to order for Monday, September 19th, 2022. Thanks everyone for attending in person. We are meeting hybrid, so we also have folks participating remotely via WebEx, so welcome to those individuals as well. I would like the record to reflect that Councilor Davis is excused. We will start with our Pledge of Allegiance. Suzanne, do you mind leading us? Thank you, Suzanne. We'll move on to item 3 of our agenda, which is communications from the public. If you're here to speak on our 2 advertised public hearings, please hold comments until I call those specific hearings. Otherwise, if you have anything to bring to the attention of the council, your name and address for the record, please. Rebecca, speaking as a citizen.
Yeah, my name is Rebecca Norton, 530 Scott Avenue, and I'm here, not there, because I'm organizing a candidates forum this Friday night in this chambers for the Western District Congressional candidates. And it starts at 5 o'clock and it goes till 6:30. It won't be recorded unless the candidates do that themselves, but we will have microphones. So the public's welcome, and there will be an opportunity to register to vote as well. Okay.
Thank you, Rebecca. Who's next? Suzanne.
Good evening. I'm here to, well, I think I know everybody in the room, but I'm Suzanne Daniel Hildner. I live at 104 5th Street here in Whitefish. And I'm here to thank the council for implementing the recent mandatory bear canisters with the help of Republic. It is so important to our community to implement this kind of measure, given the trouble that we're having with urban wildlife. I'm active locally and regionally in what are known as Bear Smart efforts, not only in the Flathead, but in the Northern Rockies. There's a lot of work going on in this area, as I'm sure you've heard. Both sides of the divide and down into Wyoming and over into Idaho. On a personal note, we live on the river. The bike trail goes right in front of our house. The traffic from bears has increased exponentially, particularly over the last 6 or 7 years. And so this time of year, we cannot leave any household refuse in our dumpster, in our containers that Republic provides for up to 3 months of the year because of the level of bear activity that we experience on our property. This past week, I personally have cleaned up garbage 3 times. We don't place any garbage in the containers, so it's my neighbor's garbage. I bag it, I haul it to the green boxes, and we won't be able to place our own household waste until our bear canisters arrive, which will hopefully be in the next couple of weeks, or until the middle of December comes and the bears go to bed. For example, on Friday night, I think it was, I was woken up twice by bears. I chased them away. The 3rd time I was woken up was by passerby at 5:30 in the morning going, "Hey bear, hey bear, hey bear," as he went up the bike path. And that told me that I had garbage in my yard, and that passerby knew what had caused that. So again, I'm here mostly to thank you, but to urge you to stay fast. And I'm hopeful that this rollout will be smooth. It has gone fairly well in other communities around the region that have done this, but I can't stress enough how many potential bear-human interactions that may not go well we're going to avoid by implementing this. So thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne.
My name's Beth Soba, and I guess my address is 333 Baker Avenue, or P.O. Box 1973, Whitefish. I'm here to read a letter that I've written to the editors of local publications, entitled, "Why the City Should Not Be a Landlord." It's with great sadness and frustration that I write this letter. In January 2018, after months of hard work and preparation, Sobacycle, an innovative high-energy beat-based cycling studio, opened in downtown Whitefish. The first of its kind in the Flathead, it was the combined effort of a brother-sister team. Young, homegrown entrepreneurs investing their sweat, smarts, money, and energy back into their hometown. What would be better for our small town than something fresh, fun, and appealing to all ages, locals and tourists alike? Sobacycle fully and transparently complied with the city's requests, regulations, requirements for securing a lease in the north end of the soon-to-be-finished city parking garage. Upon receiving unanimous approval to lease the space, a council member was quoted in the pilot, the Whitefish pilot, saying, "You're the city's first tenant, and people will be looking to the city to make sure you follow the rules." A rather condescending attitude that persisted throughout the term of the lease. Sobacycle entered into a lease that was promptly compromised when the city failed to meet construction schedules, build-out agreements, and general contractor obligations, resulting in delayed openings and significant cost overages. Roughly 2 months after opening their doors, Sobacycle was notified that neighboring tenant would be moving to the east retail space previously designated for a restaurant. With full knowledge of Sobacycle's operations as well as limitations present in the space, the Yoga Hive entered into a lease and began their build-out. This gave the city and Yoga Hive the perfect opportunity to implement sound mitigation measures during construction, which both chose not to do. It didn't take long for the Yoga Hive to begin lodging complaints about the loud noise coming from Sobacycle classes, disturbing their silence and tranquility. Any landlord inherently accepts the responsibility to choose compatible tenants that can both operate and thrive within the limitations of their space. The city failed. Rather than take responsibility for an obvious mistake, the city began a campaign of harassment and threats directed at Sobacycle. Rather than work with both businesses to address the problems, the city chose to blame, harass, and threaten Sobacycle. Rather than modify the structure to improve sound transmission, the city chose to blame, harass, and threaten Sobacycle. This pattern of behavior continued throughout the 4.5-year lease, costing Sobacycle thousands of dollars in legal fees, sound attenuation, and countless hours of navigating the process. Clearly, Sobacycle was there first. So why were they made the target? After 5 years of successful operation, Sobacycle closed its doors when the city refused to honor their automatic lease renewal, stating Sobacycle was in default due to the loud noise and disturbing the neighboring tenant. Did Yoga Hive ever sign off on any disclosure that they were choosing to open and operate next to a beat-based cycling studio? Why was Yoga Hive given the right of first refusal on the Sobacycle lease should Sobacycle vacate? With the closing of Sobacycle, the city is free to exercise their agreement with Yoga Hive. Sobacycle loses, but so does Whitefish. Gone is a successful, innovative, upbeat, active, fun, unique, healthy option for all. A viable, dynamic creation destroyed in large part by the city of Whitefish. My advice, please hire a competent licensed property manager to administer your leases and manage your properties. Thank you.
Further comments from the public? Jan.
Jan Metzmaker, 915 Dakota. I'm here about a different animal. I did send a letter to the council about deer and the issues we have with deer in the city. And then 1.5 miles from my house to here, I counted at least 12 deer on the road or next to the road. And I noticed in your transportation plan that collisions with animals is number 3 on your list of reasons for collisions. I know Fish, Wildlife, and Parks would very much like to look at this situation, but they can't do anything unless you invite them in. I'm very concerned about someone getting killed because of a collision with a deer, and you know it's going to happen. I'm concerned that rutting season is happening, and I'm really tired of the circus of deer chasing the other deer around our yard. I'm tired of picking up deer poop. I'm tired of them ruining our trees and all our landscaping, and this is throughout the whole community. Doesn't matter if you're downtown or outside of town. We do have a deer problem in this town, and I'd like Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to look at it and evaluate it. I'm not advocating anything, but I think we need to look at this problem and come up with some solutions before somebody gets really hurt.
Thanks, Jen. Further comments from the public? Richard.
Mr. Mayor and Council, Richard Hildner, 104 5th Street. First of all, Craig, thank you very much for the paint on the crosswalks and the bicycle lanes. I appreciate that, as do, I'm sure, the children going to and from school. So thank you for getting on that. Appreciate it. And the library. I haven't been over to see if you got the paint on the library. That leaves us only 2 things left, right? Okay, so anyway, thank you for that. Also, I wish to thank, along with Suzanne, thank the city for rolling out the bear-resistant containers. I know that's been a long time in the offing, and it's long overdue, and it's nice to see it coming through. So thanks again for everybody for their patience, and hopefully the bears will go elsewhere when they can't get a free lunch in Whitefish. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. Further public comments this evening? Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council? Any board reports?
Yeah, we met again with our housing consultants and went through the recent data. And we have a lot of work to do, but it was a really good meeting. I don't know if Dana might want to add something later.
Thanks, Rebecca. We'll move on to our consent agenda. I would entertain a motion to adopt the special as well as regular meeting minutes along with the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. And that motion does carry unanimously, which brings us on to our first public hearing of the night, which will be public hearing item number 6A on our agenda, Resolution 22-29, a resolution of intent to adopt the 2022 Whitefish Transportation Plan as amended to the 2007 Whitefish City-County Growth Policy and adopting findings with respect to such amendment. And this was postponed from our September 6, 2022 meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our Public Works Director, Craig Workman, or Dave Taylor for that matter. For
Actually, yeah, I'm going to be doing this, just the staff report is,
okay,
because it's part of an adoption to the growth policy. So yeah, this 2022 public review draft has been forwarded to you guys from the planning board, where they reviewed it in August. It was prepared by KLJ Engineering. They were also assisted by a transportation plan study review committee. Then they had virtual listening sessions and public open house as part of this, as well as several work sessions with the planning board and the city council on this plan. It's a companion document to the 2007 Whitefish City County Growth Policy, as well as the Downtown Business District Master Plan and the MDT Downtown Highway Study. And it shows future road locations as a guide as the community grows and properties in outlying areas are subdivided. And a lot of the lines are placeholders for future roads that tie into existing transportation grids, and many of those will be built by developers as those areas are subdivided. So the study area includes the area both within the urban boundary determined by MDT and city limits, as well as additional areas outside of those boundaries to account for those areas developing that could see growth over a 20-year study horizon. It prioritizes goals and objectives to improve transportation into the future and provides a practical set of policies and tasks to achieve those objectives. As far as the growth policy goes, we do have a chapter in that growth policy on transportation and this plan is consistent with that. So staff did recommend approval of the plan to the Whitefish Planning Board. I went before them, as I mentioned, on August 18th, and the planning board unanimously recommended approval and adoption of the plan. We had a work session to kind of go over the ins and outs, and then Craig is also here to answer more specific questions about any of the plan content.
Thanks, Dave. Just so the public's aware, we did hold a work session with Public Works and Planning in advance of this regular meeting tonight, where we had public participate and ask questions as well.
Yep, good evening. And so I'm not going to go through the PowerPoint that we just went through, but there were a number of questions that came up from council and from the public during the work session. So I wanted to touch on a few of those and then also go through an update to the memo that was in your packet that I just did earlier today. So can I share my screen? Will it let me, Michelle? Clicking on share my screen. I don't know what happened. I don't see it up there. I shouldn't have to be plugged in, should I? Oh. All right, sorry about that. I thought I was sharing online. Not that screen. Hold on a second. All right, now we're good. No, we're not. Spitting. So the first thing I want to bring up, if my computer will let me, is the diagram of the Wisconsin Avenue corridor. As we talked about, there's two primary corridors that we looked at in the transportation plan. Being the most recent corridor studies the city completed, the first was Highway 93 South, and then Wisconsin Avenue. And it was kind of tough to tell on the graphic exactly what was being proposed. So I have open on the screen now the actual transportation plan. And so this is the sheet in the plan that looks at the intersection improvements that we're showing on Wisconsin Avenue. So starting from the south, we show a combination of medians and two-way left turn lane. So this is the proposed turn lane that is shown in the plan at Skiles and Woodside. So you can see northbound would have a left-hand turn lane going into Skiles, allowing northbound traffic to pass. Southbound would have a left-hand turn onto Woodside, allowing southbound traffic to pass. From that point north to Denver would be the two-way left turn, where vehicles would be able to travel north-south in the travel lanes and then turn into businesses and residences from that two-way left turn lane. Denver does have a proposed left turn lane for southbound traffic, and then you'd pick up again with that two-way left turn all the way up to Greenwood. Excuse me, to Labrie. There are also turn lanes proposed at Glenwood, Colorado, and Reservoir Road, and then as we discussed, the roundabout at Big Mountain Road. I want to jump into the memo here that you guys have in front of you. This was appended to your packet late last week, but I did just make some changes earlier today that I wanted to highlight. So the goal of the memo really is just to talk about changes to the plan that occurred since the most recent study review committee meeting, which happened back in May. Since that meeting, there was a public open house. a city council work session, a planning board work session, and a planning board public hearing. Of course, we plan to bring this to council at the last meeting, but received some comments just before that public hearing and decided we should spend a little more time with it in order for me to put together this document. So since that last study review committee meeting, we did have comments from the Montana Department of Transportation, and some of those comments have been addressed in this plan. The most significant of which is actually the last bullet point of this memo. I'm just going to jump to the very last bullet point first. So we wanted to add some more clarity to the outcome of the downtown highway study. And MDT requested that we use the term no-build alternative being their preferred alternative. And in fact, that's not the case. MDT did complete the downtown highway study with option C as their recommended alternative. They simply wrote a memo and did a press release after the downtown highway study was completed, saying that they were going to shelf the report and didn't have any intention of carrying forward with alternative C. So the most recent draft of the transportation plan does have that no-build alternative, but we do intend to change the language to state, while MDT has agreed not to proceed with option C, which is the preferred alternative identified in the downtown highway study. This does occur on 4 different pages of the transportation plan, on page 20 of the executive summary, as well as pages 8, 103, and 120 of the body of the plan. So I'm proposing to make that change. Then going back to the top of the memo, I just want to kind of go through these individually, if you don't mind. Since that most recent study review committee, the plan was reviewed by a number of staff members, and there were quite a few editorial and grammatical changes made, none of which were substantive, but I did want to make everyone aware of that. We did make some procedural and technical edits based on the comments of MDT. The only significant one that I found was that no-build comment, which we are in the process of editing. It was brought to our attention that the vision statement in the executive summary did not match the vision statement in the body of the report, and so those will be brought into conformance with each other. The statement was made during the last study review committee to improve the vision statement, to indicate that the vision of the plan also supports economic vitality, and that statement was not made in the executive summary, so that will be changed. We made some edits to the goals and strategies in the plan, and then since those changes were made, we had a number of comments from Citizens for a Better Flathead, and I'll go through those real quickly. So the last sentence in Goal 1, I want to amend based on their language, which is shown in that box. So the amended language will be, uphold and enforce the city's policy of concurrency, so transportation facilities, including streets, public safety, and emergency services, pedestrian, bikeway, and trail facilities are made available before the impact of the new development. The same goal should also include this language on page 9, uphold and enforce the city's concurrency policy as set forth in the 2007 Whitefish Growth Policy, requiring developers to provide off-site transportation improvements upfront so that facilities are available concurrently with demand. These transportation improvements should include roadways, sidewalks, bikeways, transit infrastructure, trail facilities, and other related infrastructure. Strategy number 10 under Goal 2 will be revised to state, for developments providing primarily low-income or workforce housing that can clearly demonstrate and document reduced transportation impacts and the ability to meet the transportation needs of residents through alternative transportation methods, the city motorized transportation concurrency requirements can have more flexible interpretations. So the intention of this specific goal change is to give the city some flexibility when it comes to workforce housing, and potentially be more flexible with the interpretations of the concurrency requirements. The goal on page 6 and on page 14 under strategies will be revised to read as follows in the memo, or as indicated in the memo. And then there are a number of sections in the strategies where we talk about concurrency, and the recommendation was made by citizens to bring all of those together rather than to have them scattered throughout all of the different strategies. And so what I am recommending is the plan that you have in front of you be changed so that all of the strategies under goal number 7 be combined to include those concurrency statements. And then there's one other strategy under goal 5 which would be added to develop criteria and require findings with the planning office staff reports that evaluate a proposed development compliance with the city's concurrency policy and mitigation identified with the required TIS. So that's a strategy that citizens recommended we add, which I agree with. So I believe the rest of these are just changes that were made basically to either add additional information on specific improvements or corridor preservation, with the exception of the downtown highway study comment that I talked about earlier. So based on all of this and the comments that we received at the work session, it's staff's recommendation that council does approve this transportation plan tonight. There are some changes that will have to be made in the next 2 weeks, which we would do, and then it would be my recommendation to put this on the consent agenda for the next meeting for final adoption.
Thanks, Craig. Any questions for Craig on his staff report? We'll start with Steve.
Just with respect to the traffic impact studies that we're going to now have guidelines for, do we know of traffic engineers that can do a multimodal transportation impact study and analysis? Are those the people that are like WGM usually does traffic impact studies? Do they also, they just simply don't include that, or what is?
Correct. No, it's the multimodal element of the traffic impact study should be completed by the traffic engineer that's doing the TIS. And so typically any of the engineers that we see working for developers that have a certified traffic engineer should be able to do those.
Okay, but we currently just don't get that information, is that?
No, we get that information, but what this plan will now be asking for is a higher level of detail when that's provided.
Okay, thank you.
Rebecca.
Yeah, Craig, Richard Hildner brought up the issue of planning for medical emergencies and also fire mitigation. And so is that do we plan that in a different way with fire and police, or is there room in this plan for something like that?
Yeah, I don't know that a transportation plan, I agree with Richard that it's an important part of city planning. This transportation plan looks at the network as a whole, and it makes a variety of different recommendations on different projects, all of which are intended to improve traffic flow, improve circulation, reduce congestion. If and when there is a specific emergency, we would have more dialed evacuation plans that would work specifically on those. And I think Joe and Bridger maybe can speak a little more to that, but each emergency is going to have its own set of criteria. I mean, if it's a wildfire in the Whitefish Range, obviously we're trying to get people from north to south as quickly as we can. If it's a rail car that's overturned and it has specific contaminants that could migrate in different directions, we'll have a different evacuation plan for that type of emergency. So to try and forecast a specific emergency in a transportation planning document, I think is a little inappropriate, but it is definitely something that we need on hand.
So another idea I just thought of while you were talking is, I was at a meeting with John once, and he brought up the idea of the mayor, sorry, a bridge over the railroad, where kind of near where I forget what those, High Tower or High, do you know that Abrams built that area by the dog
High
park?
Point?
High Point.
A high point.
Yeah, and now we're gonna approve, we just approved another development across the railroad. And we just have never really discussed that too much, but it was an idea as a long-term plan, just for evacuation and ease of traffic, except over the viaduct. And so I just am putting that out there. It's not in this transportation plan, but it's something that I've heard maybe 3 times over the years. And so I just wanted to say, maybe there's a possibility of doing that at some point.
So, yeah, real quickly, it is in this plan. We do show separated grade crossings of the rail yard in 2 other locations in this plan. One would be Columbia over to Texas, and then the other one is turning East 2nd Street into a separated grade crossing. We're also working with BNSF. We talked a little bit the last meeting about the railroad crossing elimination program that the Federal Railroad Administration has just unveiled, and we're working with BNSF on a grant application to look further into all of the crossings in the city, and so that will continue to be explored. But we do talk about, additional means to cross the tracks in this plan.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
I was just
For the record as well, Rebecca, I think my comment was related to when we were looking at snow lot development opportunities, and I had suggested perhaps requiring a dedicated right-of-way for a future overpass that would connect Columbia to Texas Avenue. So just FYI. You bet. Frank?
Right, a couple of things. The emergency evacuation aspect. Am I on now?
Yes.
Okay. Switches, I hate them. In any case, we talked a little bit earlier about the, emergency evacuation requirements for transportation plan. I understood everything you just said. I just want to get an understanding of what we're doing. We're creating a transportation plan that will be overlaid with the emergency evacuation plans for various alternatives? Is that what we're saying?
No, I'm saying they should be 2 separate documents. An emergency evacuation plan should be more specific to
Correct.
the emergency itself. The
Right.
transportation plan looks at the entire transportation grid and makes recommendations regardless of emergency or not. Let's make sure that this transportation grid serves the city for the next 20 years.
I concur.
Okay.
But given our unique requirements in this city and the areas that can be isolated, would not it make sense, whether it's in this transportation plan and/or a plan for emergency evacuations, be overlaid on top of the transportation plan? I mean, what I'm suggesting to you is we need to plan for the alternative emergencies that we're likely going to see at some point in this city's life. And so if we're planning on a 20-year basis plus, all I'm saying is, where does that take place?
So, Frank, I might just jump in here, and Joe, maybe you can jump in as well, but, sorry, my mic changed volumes. I think that when we look at evacuations, and Joe will speak to this, we aren't just looking at city roads, we are looking at county roads, right? So working through that process, Joe, I don't know if you want to just share a little bit about from the emergency operations plan that we have in place, how that would go.
Yeah, we've started working on plans based on the different things we'd be evacuating from, knowing that there's a lot of different things going on. It's wind direction, weather. Are we evacuating from a hazmat situation, a wildland fire? Getting those plans together. Of course, the big issue we're going to have is communicating with a population that's tourist-based and getting the information out how we're going to do that. But I am working on that.
We talked about it earlier, about the reference in our active transportation plan, putting our minimum standard for shared use paths to 10 feet. Is that going to be done?
I guess I'd like to hear some direction from council on that. There isn't anything in this plan that states 8 feet is recommended. It is carried forward in this plan that 8 feet is an alternative for specific situations, but I think we could add language to, bolster the fact that 10 feet is really what we're looking for. And I could show you that language.
And you can qualify it, in my view. I mean, a lot of the areas that we're talking about, have concerns about, Craig, are going to be very high-use paths. And I think we ought to focus and at least make it clear that that's what the city's plan is, particularly in the high-use areas that are important to the city. And yeah, I think we set a standard, in my view, and then we've got a specific exception to that. Let's talk about it. But I think that ought to be our position going forward.
Yeah, the only place where path width is even discussed in this plan is on page 134, where it simply says paths 8 feet in width may be allowed for low traffic situations or along riparian buffer zones.
My opinion on this, Frank, is I think that comment for now is sufficient to be included in our engineering standards, but to the comments that we heard this evening, I tend to agree that this is a 10,000-foot planning level document, and we should put out there what we desire. And it shouldn't be embodied, that comment, I think, in this plan. When we adopted the downtown master plan, for example, we didn't indicate, well, to meet our pedestrian goals on the sidewalks, we want 12 feet, but we'll take 8. And I kind of see this plan along the same lines as that document. So that would be my suggestion, would be to eliminate the reference to, but we will go to 8 feet. Thanks, Steve. Okay. Further questions for Craig? Giuseppe.
Craig, just to clarify, when was last time that you and the state talked about what the state agreed or disagreed to build in the downtown area?
It would have been when we received their comments, which was in June.
And they clearly...
June 18th.
Thank you. And they clearly said, we agree not to proceed with option C, which is the preferred alternative identified. They said that.
Well, what their comment said was the city, the state decided to go with the no-build alternative, which was inaccurate, and we talked to them about that, but we still did carry that forward in the plan as you see it today. But that's simply inaccurate, because when you read the study, it clearly shows they prefer alternative C.
Okay, and I'm concerned about finances here. Out of those 100...
Can I comment on that real quickly,
Sure.
Giuseppe? Coming out of the working group meetings, at our last meeting with Bob Boyson, who's head of DOT for this area, it was agreed that the city and DOT had reached an impasse regarding our preferred alternatives, C versus G. And we were told at that time that that language would be included in the executive summary, that we arrived at a difference in opinion on the alternative.
Thank you. So
bet.
the current status is that we are aware that if we proceeded with option G, right now, we won't get any funding from the state to help us concretize that vision. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I mean, correct. I guess
Thank
that's
you.
correct, yes.
Okay, the other question I have is about the revised goals in the memo. Thank you for doing this. Are these goals, obviously, they've been revised after the planning board recommended this plan, correct?
Yes, correct.
So is there any ground that we should have the planning board review the whole plan, including the concerns about emergency evacuation and honestly the concern about funding on concept G?
Not in my opinion. I think these revisions simply help to strengthen what the original premise of the goal was. They don't change the, the purpose of the goal in any way.
Thank you.
Further questions, Giuseppe? Yep. Any further questions from the council? Rebecca?
It just seems there are more housekeeping kinds of clarifications than any substantial change. Would you say that's true, Craig?
Yes, correct.
Thanks, Rebecca. With that said, we will hold our public hearing now that has been advertised for this agenda item, which will be Resolution 22-29. Is there any public comment this evening? Bruce.
Good evening. Bruce Booty, 301 2nd Street, landscape architect. Took a lot of time at the work session, so I'll just cut this short. And I'd like to submit this for the record, but two asks. One is that we change the language for the shared use paths in the document to be a minimum of 10 feet, in accordance with AASHTO guidelines. And the second ask is, we have two segments of trail that have been designed and are going into construction or ready to. And those paths have been reduced from 10 to 8. And they're along the river corridor. They're very high use segments. And I'd like to see those reinstated to a 10-foot width. And with that, I'll let you get on with your evening here.
Bruce, clarification on your last request. Is it articulated in this document that those two trail segments have been designed at an 8-foot width?
No, actually, we designed them at 10, but we've been directed to change that design to 8.
But nowhere is that referenced in this transportation plan, correct? Okay, great, thank you. Casey.
Well, as we all know, the bike ped trail is an important, if not essential, part of the transportation plan. So I too am here to speak to that. Oh, sorry, Casey Malmquist, 160 Walker Creek Lane. Once again, I'm kind of before you in a bit of a strange position, ironic one. I am doing those two projects, and they have been sort of suggested to go back down to the 8 foot. So while this arguably will cost, I mean, these two projects compromise about a half-mile section of trail in the city, if not a little over $1 million. So I'm asking you to make a decision that's going to cost me about $200,000. But I think it's essential that we do it right this time and build the trails to the ADA, the AASHTO standards in the 10-foot configuration. Make that part of the transportation plan as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Casey. Ed.
Ed Leeser, 1355 Lion Mountain Drive. I'm also a strong advocate for the 10-foot width. You know, normally as a board member of Whitefish Legacy Partners and the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation, I try to minimize our footprint whenever we have that option. However, and especially in riparian areas, but given the anticipated flow and traffic, you know, this just really seems like a potential hazard, necking it down. And I took the time to measure the width of the trail from K. Beller underneath Highway 93 under the bridge, and it's 10 feet already. So necking it down on that river trail section just seems like it would, you know, it would restrict traffic that's already wider. And you know, there would have to be a railing along the river side of that, which would, if it were an 8-foot, it would be almost 7 feet. So a 10-foot seems like a minimum size. So, thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Further public comment tonight? Jan?
Jan Metzmaker, 915 Dakota. I concur with everyone else. We need a 10-foot roadway or sidewalk, bikeway there. If you had bikes and kids and dogs, you need that extra 10 feet. I appreciate all the changes they've made on Wisconsin with the turns, safe turns, but I have to turn on Labrie, and as Andy Fury can attest, when his wife got rear-ended there, it's a dangerous place because you're starting to go down the hill and people can't see when you're trying to turn left. And we've got some major construction projects in our neighborhood, and it's like dump trucks all day, every day, turning onto Labrie. And then you get onto Dakota, and I've lived there 34 years, and I've been waiting for curbs, sidewalks, and gutters, and street lights. And we get a lot of use because people don't want to be on Wisconsin. So I kind of wish you'd look at Dakota for some of the changes and make that more user-friendly, because we do get a ton of dog walkers, bikers, and families using that. And it's all disconnected with sidewalks, other sides of the streets. And, well, you all know, you've been there. So if you could, I noticed everything was Wisconsin, not much on Dakota. So thanks.
Thanks, Jan.
Hi, Nelson Rusendahl. I just want to ask the people viewing on their devices how they feel about option C, especially pages 8, 103, and 120, and particularly the change to the TIS. This transportation plan, I think, doesn't have significant input from or consultation with the public, and it's going to cost $500 million. It's pretty ambitious. So I recommend not approving it. I don't see where it pretends to improve traffic flow or reduce congestion. I understand that's its purpose, but I'm not seeing that from visiting the work session that is about to happen. So, thanks.
Thanks for the comments.
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to make one correction. I've heard the number $500 million twice tonight, and it's 178 million, I believe, which is quite a ways from $500 million, so.
We're not going to go back and forth. That's not the purpose of a public hearing.
We went back.
Are you commenting on the councilor's comment?
Yeah.
Or briefly?
I am. We were talking about $185 million projected for this project in today's dollars. We have 10% inflation. You want to correct that? It's going to cost a lot of money. If over the next 10 years, the city takes all the money that they could possibly figure out how to budget, they'll pay for 31% of it. If you look at the building we're standing in and think about what it was projected to cost and what it cost, this is going to be a $500 million project.
Thanks for your comments. Any further public comment?
Feels like old home week right now. Antonia Malchik, 528 9th Street West in Whitefish. I just have two comments. One was I wanted to slightly correct the record from the work session. I'm on the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and it felt like there was an impression that the committee approved or disapproved language about the paths. And when we had our meeting last week, there were only 3 or 4 of us present, and we didn't have any time to actually review the documents that came up. So that is not disapprove or approve the 10-foot versus 8-foot. I just wanted to correct the record on that the committee hadn't really discussed it before it came up in the meeting. And the second was, in the work session, Mary Flowers, I think it was, had mentioned advice about coming up with a transportation committee. And I know our city has a lot of committees. It doesn't seem like a bad idea, but I do think if we're serious about viewing biking and walking as transportation, it's really central to keeping a connected community and an active community, you know, where kids can get around and people can, you know, get around town in any way possible that's not a car, that those should at least be very integrated, if not part of the same thing. So that's just a thought if you're thinking about pursuing that. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks. Further public comment from those present before we go to Mary Flowers? We'll start. Richard, comment.
Thank you, Mayor, councilors. As I mentioned at the work session, I think it's really important to memorialize in this document that 10-foot widths are our standard, period. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And just keep that language just as simple as possible. And then if you have an exception, you have to deal with that later, as you suggested, Mr. Mayor. So I think that the 10-foot, you can justify that because it is consistent with the Connect Whitefish 2017 plan. It's part of our bike ped plans for the city. So I'm going to leave it at that. I disagree a little bit with Craig. As Whitefish grows, the transportation plan has to deal with that question of egress in case of emergency. And I realize that every emergency has a different set of plans. But the fact of the matter is that we have to be able to move people. And if you can't move people, some people are going to find themselves in extremis and they can't get out of a situation. So I think that the transportation plan has to deal with the question of egress, and specifically with wildfire and the developments north of the railroad tracks, because that's where one problem is going to happen. The other problem that's going to happen is if we get wildfire coming into the city and it becomes no longer wildfire, but it becomes structure to structure, we are going to have to be able to move. And I gave you the example of the mill fire of September 2nd. So with that, I know that Craig had some things in the memo and some things he shared with you just before the meeting. There have been some comments and recommendations that have been added to the plan. I think an option for you may be to continue this discussion, number one, to 2 weeks hence to your next council meeting, so that you have plenty of time to look at those comments that were provided by the planning department, including today's memo. 2 weeks is not too much when you have a plan that's taken 2 years to develop and bring forward. So give that to your consideration, if you would, please. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. Michelle, we'll go to remote comments now, and we'll start with Mary Flowers.
Good evening. I'm assuming you can hear me.
We can.
Okay. So I want to start by thanking Craig for, and again, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead, 135 Main Street in Kalispell. Appreciate the consideration that were given to our comments to date. And just want to add a little bit that we would still like you to consider. And on this issue that Richard just spoke to, I would like to, and Frank as well, I think we need to figure out a way within our transportation plan to create some standards and some benchmarks to really look at the needs where congestion is a real issue. Because it's not just fires or a train issue. It also can be a powder day on the mountain, and we hear that, people can't get through in some routes. So I really think that's an issue that would be could be called out for additional consideration in the plan. And I do hope you will look at establishing a working committee on transportation. To the speaker who encouraged that you include bike and pedestrian and transit within that committee's preview, I think that's, to me, transportation has to include those things. And I think that the ability to look at our transportation impact studies and make sure that they are getting us the information that we really need to understand issues of emergency services, issues of standards that address maintenance needs, not just looking at traffic counts from existing uses, but look at traffic counts projected out with build-out analysis and really start to try to ensure that transportation costs are being covered by the growth that is occurring in the city. And so I think this plan provides a good foundation, but I would really like to see the city establish annual benchmarks and reporting so that it stays front and center, because not only is housing an issue, but transportation is a top issue, and it deserves ongoing work. Within our comments, excuse me, while I try to get my computer to cooperate here. We addressed some issues on page 11, goal 3. It calls for reduced minimum parking requirements for new housing and commercial developments. I think that is such a broad goal that if it's not clarified, it's not helpful in this plan, and it can justify parking reductions that are not based in fact. Again, on page 15, goal 7, this is within the Highway 93 South corridor. Increase opportunities for public access to natural areas. Again, without some sideboards for that, we can love an area to death. And I think it's important that we have strategies that have sideboards and are not just blanket. Again, page 16, goal 7, accommodate increasing traffic volumes without degrading downtown livability and the retail environment. It may be an aspirational goal, but it doesn't have much to measure by or to really give direction to establishing some requirements or evaluating whether a proposed development is meeting that strategy or not. And finally, and I'm out of town, so it's a little bit handicapped on viewing some of this material. I don't know if the staff report that accompanies the transportation plan tonight still includes the same wording that the lines on the map are placeholders, not showing optimal corridor locations that tie into existing transportation grids, and they are in no way binding. I think that really ties the hands of the city to have that kind of wording, in your staff report. And I think Karen addressed that briefly at, and I'm not sure which meeting it was at, but I think it was at the planning board in saying that that was part of the wording in the original staff report. But I think the city has to use this plan to require that development does build this network of roads, which is so much needed if we are going to grow. And so I would ask that you look carefully at that staff report, because that will be adopted, as I understand it, as part of your findings for the transportation plan. And let's see, I would also encourage you to leave the public comment period open for the next meeting. I agree with Richard that there's some important changes being made, and I think it's an opportunity for all of us to kind of take one more hard look at this plan, and because it is going to be a guide for a long time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. I don't see anyone else online, Michelle. With that said, I'll go ahead and close the public comment period and turn it back to the council for discussion, or preferably a motion one way or another to keep this moving forward. Rebecca.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to continue to the next meeting. I think there's...
Well, before you comment, let's get a second. Does that imply to keep the public hearing open or closed?
Open.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second. Seconded
by Councilor Sweeney. Rebecca?
Just, Craig's going to rework a lot of things, and I actually think the public is very concerned about evacuation routes. I know some of it has to be kept, not secret, but quiet, because we don't want to alarm people with what our plans are and stuff, but I think it would be helpful for the public to know how we would evacuate different areas. And so I don't know if Joe could add to this, or maybe we could address it at a different time. And I do like the idea of having regular meetings on transportation, because almost every development we see, it becomes a big issue with our infrastructure being so limited. And so if we targeted it and had regular committee or regular meetings, then at least the public would be informed regularly that we actually are working on it. I mean, I know our staff is working on it all the time, but it would be front and center that we're solving a problem that everybody is concerned about. So I think there's enough change that if we continued for 2 more weeks, it wouldn't hurt the process, but I don't know. Craig's probably pretty tired of working on it.
Thanks, Rebecca. Any further comments on the motion, Steve?
I'm not going to support the motion. I don't know what we're substantially going to get in 2 weeks regarding an evacuation plan. That seems like a pretty heavy lift in terms of coming up with what our plan's going to be based on where it's going to be and what the emergency is. And I think in an emergency situation, we leave that up to the emergency people on staff that we have, which is our police chief and our fire chief. And second, this is a high-level plan that shows where the transportation is. Could it have an addendum later that has a emergency plan that's an addendum to it? Sure. There's nothing that prevents us from doing that in the future. But to postpone it, thinking that we're going to get some sort of emergency plan in place in 2 weeks that's vetted enough is just, I don't think that's realistic. The other thing is that this has been out there for a really long time. It has been vetted by the public. Contrary to public comment tonight, lots of people have looked at this. It has been in the works for a really long time, over 2 years, lots of public comment about it. And also, it is designed, in fact, every project in here is designed to limit or somehow reduce congestion. That's what it's about. With that said, if I could get, there's one change I'd like to make, and I don't know if I should make that now. I think it's something that we all agree to, but I have a very simple solution to the 8-foot, 10-foot problem. And I'm not sure what the process for getting something like that done would be.
You can go ahead and make that as a friendly amendment
Okay.
to the document, whether this is voted in favor or against, is
Okay.
regardless.
All right, I would like to make a friendly amendment to the document. I don't know if that
John?
makes sense at this point as a continuation. Yeah, it's not amendment.
Yeah, you guys might,
If it's
yeah,
continued.
vote on the
Okay.
postponement first.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Yep. Giuseppe, did you have comments?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I would support postponing, not just because of the emergency concerned, but because honestly, in good conscience, I cannot vote for a plan that clearly states one of the options, knowing already that we, the city of Whitefish and the state, are not in agreement, because we said that we are in an impasse. So if we postpone it, which I would vote for, I would ask that we consider finding a medium ground, a middle ground, for which if we continue with this plan 20 years down the road, we are working together with the state and not knowing that we are already in a stalemate situation.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Frank?
It's on? Oh. Okay, here we go. I'm going to support Rebecca's motion mostly because the difference between approving it tonight, looking at the document as going to be revised, and I appreciate all the revisions that you're going to make, Craig, and then pulling it from the agenda then for further discussion and just simply postponing it 2 weeks with an open public hearing and getting the document back as we've all agreed that we want to have it written, makes more sense to me than, like I said, approving it tonight and then pulling it for reconsideration once we get the revised document. So I think it's important. I don't think we're going to get an emergency services plan as part of the revisions, and I'm not looking for that as a condition of my approval. But I think it would be prudent of us to actually see the changes in the document before we approve it. And that's no, I'm not trying to postpone this anymore, and it's the work you're going to have to do anyway, so I don't think we're putting any more burden on you. So is my reason for supporting it.
Thanks, Frank. And Andy?
Well, I wasn't going to support it, but Frank, you convinced me, so there you go. But yeah, I think I'm perfectly comfortable with, waiting a couple of weeks. I think that's fine. It's going to be a couple of weeks regardless, and if we come back in 2 weeks and we're not perfectly comfortable, then we're going to postpone again anyway, so I'm comfortable with that option. It is a resolution of intent to adopt, so we certainly have that option to bring it back out and look at it at that point were we to go ahead and move it forward today, and it has been going for a long time, so I understand that argument, and Steve, that did not fall on deaf ears, and there has been a lot of public input, and so I'm comfortable that we've given the public an opportunity to work with this document at the planning board level, at open houses, online, and all of those places, but I'll go ahead and support the motion.
Thank you, Andy. Further comments on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry with a 4-1 vote with Councilor Quinnell voting in opposition. And just for the record, the public hearing will remain open for our October 3rd meeting. We will move on to item 6B of our agenda, which is Resolution 22-29, a resolution to establish City Council and committee rules and procedures. Angie.
Good evening. My staff report begins on, well, it's only one page, on 309 of the packet. So both Montana law and the city charter allow the city council to adopt its own procedures and rules governing public meetings. We have done this to a certain extent. It is actually contained in our code as well as state law, and the city has consistently abided by what is in the city code and state law. But over the past 4 years, there has become an apparent need for us to actually kind of consolidate the state law and the city charter or the city code, just to provide kind of a document to especially provide the public for some guidelines with respect to public meetings. I think you guys are all well aware of how this works, but I don't know that, especially people that don't attend public meetings very often are aware of it. It kind of became apparent when we were sued. One of the allegations in the lawsuit was that we didn't have rules and procedures. I don't necessarily agree with that allegation, but sometimes good things do come of litigation, and I think consolidating our rules and procedures in one place is a good idea. We've also had several very large issues, very large projects in front of City Council where the public meetings have maybe not gone as efficiently as we would like them to have gone. So we did draft, or I did draft, City Council and committee rules and procedures. These were actually based on some recommendations by the MSU Extension Office, who did some local government training for us several months ago. I'm not going to go through them in details. I'm certainly available for questions, but generally speaking, part 2 of them just sets forth our standards with respect to public participation. These are what are referred to as Montana Sunshine Laws. Regarding open meetings of council, notice of agenda items. The general procedures, cover the quorum, adding items to an agenda, which is actually part of our city code, but it's in a very strange place of our city code that's kind of hard to find. How we administer our agenda in our packet. Order of business, again, you guys are old hands at this, you get it, but I think for people that are new to public meetings, it's good to, have a roadmap for them. Rules of council and committee participation, basically how we conduct meetings, and again, like I said, you guys are old hands, but not everybody is. The procedures involving public hearings, setting some time limitations. Planning board actually has their own rules and procedures. Setting forth some time limitations with respect to the applicant presenting and then rebuttal period. And guidelines for public participation. How to submit written comments, when to submit written comments. I think Michelle has done an amazing job of providing you guys written comments even when they come up right to the deadline of the meeting, but I think it's important for the public to know how that process works. And allowing the presiding officer, be it John or Frank when he's deputy, setting some time limits on public comment. We do have a very robust public that's very interested in commenting. I think that's lovely, but we've had some meetings where they've gone extremely late, and I feel like so many people wanted to speak but maybe didn't have the opportunity. So just allowing the mayor or the deputy mayor the discretion to set some time limitations so you guys can run efficient meetings. Some little rules about decorum. We have a wonderful public, and usually they are very good, but we've had some clapping and hooting and some kind of disrespectful situations occur, especially in the last couple of years. So that's kind of the general overview. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Angie. We'll start with Steve.
Angie, I see time limits for the applicant. What are the time limits for individual comments? I might have just missed them.
Yeah, no, it's kind of actually, it's on the very last page. If you go down to section 5, it says the presiding officer may set time limitations on public comment in the interest of conducting efficient meetings and or to ensure all members of the public that wish to provide testimony are able to do so.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Is that time limit codified in state law to 3 minutes?
It is not codified in state law to 3 minutes. There's various, cities handle it different ways, and there's a Montana Supreme Court decision which basically says that city councils can set time limitations on public comment. Sometimes it might be 5 minutes, sometimes it might be 3 minutes. I guess it depends on.
So it's at the discretion?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca.
Just a clarification. It says in here that a consent agenda will schedule the discussion and vote immediately following adoption of the consent agenda. So any council member can take it off, but then we're supposed to vote on it immediately. But we ran into a situation where I had had eye surgery and I wasn't seeing well enough to stay, but I had voted, it was when we were dealing with the mid-level rentals, and then on another, number 7, it says, "A motion to reconsider any action taken by the city council may only be made at the same meeting or the meeting following that at which the decision was made. A motion to reconsider may only be made if it is placed on the agenda for the following meeting by a council member who voted with the prevailing side upon adoption. If seconded, the motion to reconsider may be debated. A motion to reconsider requires a majority vote to pass." So what happened at that night is we didn't go right into discussion. It was delayed until the end of the meeting, and so I left and wasn't able to participate in the discussion. So I just wanted to know legally, how does that work? Are we required to do it right away, or?
You're
no?
not required to do it right away, but again, these are kind of procedures that will maybe provide some consistency in those kind of strange circumstances. So legally, I mean, no, it's not required to be debated right away, but that is a situation. I remember when that came up, Rebecca, and you did have to leave the meeting. So again, it's nothing that's legally required. It's just to provide some sort of roadmap and consistency when those circumstances do arise.
If it happens again, I could say, point of clarification, when will this be discussed?
Correct.
Immediately after this vote, or at the end of the meeting, and then that's how to proceed in the future?
Correct, but pulling something off the consent agenda is different than a motion to reconsider. So I know motion to reconsider, they are actually set forth in our code too, but again, it's kind of in a strange place that you wouldn't think to look, and they're kind of confusing sometimes, truthfully. So I think just having a depository of, the rules would be kind of helpful, hopefully to council, but definitely to the public, I would think.
Well, I think it might have been on the consent agenda.
I think it was on the consent agenda.
And then and the motion was to reconsider. And then the discussion was delayed till the end of the meeting. So, okay, I just want to know the strategy in the future in case I find myself in that situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Further questions? Giuseppe?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. AJ, in page 304, 2.01, you have, we put 3 situations, matters, for which we need public participation. I'm wondering if number 2 that says adopting, implementing, interpreting, or prescribing an official rule or policy of the city, would that include a council-signed proclamation?
No, it probably wouldn't consider a council-signed proclamation. Proclamations really have no legal standing whatsoever. When we're talking about rules implementing or prescribing an official rule, you're talking about resolutions setting forth rates, you're talking forth resolutions, personnel policy resolutions. A proclamation, generally, they're not really provided for in state law, and they don't really have the force of a law. So I would not say that a proclamation has to be, provide public participation, so.
Anything further from the council? I have 2 quick questions. Steve, you set? Section 3.02 under Part 3, General Procedures on page 305. Adding items to an agenda. An item will be placed on a future agenda, 1, with the approval of 3 city council members and the concurrence of the mayor and city administrator, Dana, or 2, with the approval of 4 city council members and the concurrence of the city administrator. I'm just curious, it's long been our standing policy since I sat up here, and even when Andy was mayor before my time, that items could be placed on a future agenda both during a vote of the city council meeting or via correspondence, as long as a counselor had the support of 2 other counselors and myself, or 3 other counselors. Is that still the case?
Yeah, it's still the case. This is just directly from the city code. So,
So again, an item can be placed on agenda outside of a regular scheduled meeting?
Yeah, and you guys, yes, and you guys do that.
We have.
Generally
I
not.
just wanted to make sure.
Not meeting as a quorum, but.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure we were
Yep.
above board on that.
Yep, you are.
And then section 3.04, I just want to make sure that we're consistent here because there have been times when I've reordered the order of business without the consent of council, for which I apologize if I broke the law. But I'm just curious, is it,
You did that.
is it the presiding officer's prerogative or does it require the consent of the council?
There is absolutely no law on it, and you have done that before, and that's fine. So we could actually add language in there unless altered by the consent of city council or the presiding officer.
Okay, thank you. Is the council okay with that minor change? Right, I just wanted to, good, thank you, Michelle. Anything else for Angie? With that said, we did advertise for a public hearing and we will hold that public hearing now on ordinance 22-29. Any public comment this evening? Any public comments? I'll go to Mary Flowers, who's joining us remotely. Mary.
Thank you. And again, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead, 135 South Main in Kalispell. I appreciate the reason that you are bringing this forward, but I would like to express my disappointment in the nature of this document. While it may meet the intent of the law, I don't think it meets the spirit of public participation that the public in Whitefish would like to have more broadly embraced. The 48-hour notice, I think, is inadequate for many issues. And the notice, what is really the glaring hole missing in this public participation guidelines is that in order to participate, the public has to be informed and has to have access to materials. And you've heard this from me many times, but many of the current practices of requiring input for the council packet before the release of a staff report makes it impossible for the public to meaningfully comment on the findings suggested in a staff report. And so I think the access to information is a real constitutionally protected right of the public, and it's really not addressed in this resolution before you. I think the efficiency of meetings, I can understand if I was sitting on your side of the podium that the nights can get really long with public comment. But I think efficiency is not what we're looking for. I think what we're looking for is meaningful community dialogue on issues of importance to the public. And I think you agree on that. And I think I would commend Frank when he ran the meeting for the development at the base of Big Mountain. You know, was very cordial with folks, and meetings were continued, hearings were continued. And I don't see anything in here encouraging when there is a lot of public comment to continue public hearings. I think rather than cut people short, it's appropriate to allow tools like extending a meeting to the next date that is for the planning board, if it's the next planning board meeting, or the council to the next council meeting, is an appropriate tool. I would also point out that Kalispell has a real interesting rule where they never make a decision on the night of a public hearing. And that enables them to have robust public comment, sit on it for 2 weeks and really digest that comment and then come back, and they may take additional public comment, but it gives the public the feeling that their comments have been meaningfully considered. And so I throw that out as a suggestion to think about ways to really encourage public participation. And I know that that is your intent and your goal. And I know that Whitefish has a lot of folks that come out and do speak. But I think this policy is not a, does not reflect the desires of the public to really be informed and engaged in the decisions of the city. I'd also note that I believe it's, and Angie, I don't have the citation in front of me, but I believe that public comment is required to be attached as incorporated into your minutes. And again, this is done in Kalispell and Columbia. Can't remember if Columbia Falls does it or not, but Kalispell does. And I think that is the appropriate place to put public comments so someone going back can easily find it as part of the minutes of the hearing that was before you, rather than having those comments tucked in at the end of a 428-page packet that is, you would have to go back and re-download to even find the public comment that came in at the meeting. So I'm disappointed. I hope you will look at being more creative and inviting in this policy. And I guess thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thanks, Mary. Not seeing any additional commenters on WebEx. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion, preferably one way or another.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve Resolution 22-30, a resolution to establish City Council and committee rules and procedures.
I second it.
And that'll be Resolution 22-29, if I'm not mistaken. That was seconded by Councilor Caltabiano. Frank, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I would. I think what this resolution does is it articulates our practice from years. And there is no limitation in here on, other than at the presiding officer's discretion, which needs to be reasonable in any case, in terms of restricting the amount of or the number of public comments. This city has a long history of accepting, encouraging comments. At the same time, for simply to allow this bureaucracy to move forward, on occasion, there are needs for limitations and for people who seek to dominate and take other people's time and comment. And I think that's what this discretion is given to the presiding officer, and I think it's very important that we not change that. Any changes to that would be inconsistent with how we've operated for millennia, for as long as I've been around here. So I think this is a very good step forward. That doesn't mean we can't reconsider it, or if there's changes to need to be made based on some other circumstances, that's something we can entertain at that time. But I think this is a good good organization of how we should and how we have operated.
Thanks, Frank. Any further comments? Giuseppe, and then Rebecca, I'm sorry.
Only to add a light sense of color, and I have attended the city council in Kalispell, and the presiding officer has a gavel, and he uses it.
I don't doubt Mark does. Rebecca.
Yeah, I just have a question. I guess it's about procedure. Would it be possible to put the comments, attach them to the hearing, or is that too difficult?
I will tell you that that is absolutely not required by state law. Minutes, actually, Michelle does, her minutes are pretty much like, not over the top in a bad way, but She definitely goes above and beyond. We do append comments that are received at the meeting and after 5, I think, on the meeting day, 4 or 5, we do append those to the packet, so those are available. But I'd let Michelle speak to the actual logistics of having to do that. I would just hate to add more work on Michelle.
That would just mean more minutes for you to read. I've been asked to reduce the minutes in years past because they were at one time 20 pages long because people would do a lot of wording in their minutes. So it's up to you guys on how much you want to read. I can append them, but like Angie said, I append them to the packet at the end of the packet, and it is bookmarked, and it is appended the very next day. Unfortunately, you might have to download those, but they are, what's that? And they are all online, so it's all up to what you guys prefer. But
And that has been our direction over the years.
Right. Oh, I've read the minutes for decades now. Even before I was up here, I would go and read the packet. I read the minutes after every meeting, so I do know how we have kept minutes. What I'm trying to integrate is some suggestions to make it easier for the public to track our discussions, which I think is why we might have gotten sued, is because critical thinking was not available to some people, and they really wanted to be a part of the progression of thought that led to some decision making. I had one other question, which is it possible to put the agenda out, the preliminary agenda out for people to read what is already on there ahead of time? Because it's a pretty quick turnaround by the time we get the packet Wednesday and we're deliberating on Monday. And
I will say, Rebecca, that the 48 hours actually comes from an Attorney General opinion, that is sufficient notice. The Montana Supreme Court has actually held that sometimes it can only be 24 hours notice. And really, we do get it out on Wednesday, which is double the actual time that's required by law. I don't know what the logistics of getting some sort of preliminary agenda out would be. I'll defer to Dana or Michelle.
So we provide a draft agenda on Tuesday to the Whitefish pilot so they can have it in the paper. But we make changes to that draft agenda as staff up until Tuesday.
Yeah,
And the
I know.
the earlier we have to have the packets and agendas done, it just means that, staff only has from Tuesday tomorrow to Tuesday next week to get everything ready for next week. We don't get 2 weeks between meetings, we get 1 week between
That's exactly
meetings.
right.
And so you start pushing staff time to where you're really pushing us out 2 meetings. So just keep that in mind, I guess. But the draft agenda we do develop, I think what Mary's comments were more about was that the staff reports should be available. And there's just no way, we already only give ourselves 1 week to get all of those staff reports really done when we've had direction at a prior meeting.
Thanks, Dana. Did you have anything further?
No, I think anytime we get feedback about our systems, it's okay to be open-minded about improving them. Not defensive, just open-minded so that maybe we could improve them. So thank you for at least listening to me.
I saw Steve's hand and then Frank.
I just want to say that something I've said many times, and I think that all of us up here know this, is that we do allow for more public comment than any other city that I know of in Montana, and including the State House. We do hear comments about people not having enough time, and unfortunately, a lot of that is on the people who come in late to the game, and then they feel like they don't have enough time, but they have missed the prior meetings that have been held about whatever the topic is. We also have, with regard to public hearings, we also hold a planning board meeting the month prior to whatever comes up on our agenda as city council. So there's also other opportunities there that are not required by law that we allow for. So I think that there are times when I certainly feel that I wish I didn't have to make a decision tonight. I wish I could take some time and digest the public comment, but those are pretty rare, honestly. Especially after going through the planning board, and I'm participating on the planning board, and when I'm not at that meeting, I read the minutes and I understand what happens at the planning board. So I think that people who wait till the end feel the pinch, and I don't, and the issue is that the public process actually takes a really long time, and there's a lot of ways we need to shorten it, to be honest with you, to get things done. And that is, I think that, in that sense, that is what gives government a bad name, is when it takes a long time to get anything done. And I think, I'm not advocating for shortening our public process, but I do think we take care and we do protect what we are supposed to protect in terms of the public process in this city.
Thank you, Steve. Not seeing any other comments. All those in favor of the motion to approve, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks for waiting tonight, folks, but we will move on to, while many of you are here, item 7A, consideration of a request from the Birch Hill Homeowners Association for a Whitefish Lake and Lakeshore Protection minor variance to extend an existing grandfathered community dock 20 feet out to 163 feet in length, and the property is located on Parkway Drive, and this was tabled from our September 6th, 2022 meeting. Who would like to begin? Just for the record, we did receive, Marcia, your letter for the packet. I'll go ahead and acknowledge you. Go ahead.
Good evening. I will be brief and keep this short and keep this moving. My name is Tarn Abel, 520 Parkway, which is lots of Birch Hill. But I would like first to thank you guys for serving, and thank you for the work that you do in allowing me to speak tonight. I would like to speak against a variance to the lakeshore regulations in this case. First, what you would be doing is setting a precedence that has never been done. The City Council has never allowed a variance for the topography of the lake where people are living. And the packets that you have that say that this would not affect safety are incorrect. They use the Coast Guard data from the nation, which, if you take a look at the 12 million boats that are registered in the United States and the 264,000 square miles of lakes, that's one boat for every 10 acres of navigable water. In this portion of Monks Bay, it's nearly 50 boats in a 2 to 3 acre corridor here, which is over 10,000 times the density already that you have on that part of the lake. So some of the statistics that are in your packets, please read those and understand how some of that has come about and how you are comparing apples to oranges here a little bit on what was said there. So second, if you look at page 698 of the packet that was sent in September 6th, that document is false. And the Abels are looking for an apology from the HOA, and the statements that were made there are patently false for the Abels. So it should be noted that this community park was initially established by S.M. Averold and Russell Abel when they gave up portions of Lot 2 of Birch Hill Block 1 and Lot 3 of Birch Hill Block 1 to create this park. So to say that the Abels are against this, we basically gave up our land to create this. So that is what that said is a falsehood in this. And to say that the Abels are not interested in the lake or in everyone's enjoyment of it, were not around when the lakeshore regulations were first created, as the Abels were a great part of that, to try and get so that everyone can enjoy the lake. That's what we do. In 2007, Birch Hill requested a complete redo of their dock, reconstruction, complete new dock. we were all on board with that. And in 2007, not a mention was made of, oh, it's too short, or we got to have it, or we need something different. And we supported that wholeheartedly. So to say that, you know, we were not is incorrect. And since 2007, there are no more, there's 36 lots, just like there was then. And so nothing has changed since that application in 2007. Third point and last point, and I will get off, is please listen to and respect the work that Mr. Taylor has done and your Lakeshore Preservation Committee. So in the meetings that we had, the 2 different meetings that we had, the Lakeshore Committee unanimously denied this, so that you have them for those opinions. So the planning board denied this and the planning staff, so please take their considerations into account. Request. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your comments. I will give the opportunity. Does anyone else have comments this evening before we deliberate? Sir. Oh, Kitty, go ahead, please.
Thank you. My name is Kitty Curtis. I live on Birch Hill Drive. I think the issue before the council tonight, as presented by Mr. Taylor's report, is whether there is the interference with navigation presented by our request for a 20-foot extension. If I'm not mistaken, the council has to make a finding of whether or not that is the case in order to deny the variance. That is the only issue presented by the staff report in this case. And I will remind you that the issue as presented by the staff is potential navigation interference. There is not one iota of evidence in the record before the council that this 20-foot extension will interfere with navigation. I'm curious what finding of fact the council will make to deny the variance if it's not presented in the staff report and it is not supported by the evidence in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Kitty. Sir, do you have a brief comment?
Evio Gazinski, 1230 Birch Hill. I've been, for the most part, for the last 17 years, taking care of the dock and outside that area. And most of it's pretty much a no-wake zone at this time of year. Anybody that lives there, from a safety standpoint, you better be puttering in about 2 or 3 miles an hour because it's a boulder field out there. So from a safety standpoint, everybody knows that. Everybody has their own little paths in and out. I don't see where 20 feet adding to it is going to create any additional safety issues with anybody because you just can't go fast through there. It's 2 to 3 miles. That's it. Everything's underlying with a boulder somewhere.
Thanks, Steve. Marcia.
Marcia Sheffels, 450 Parkway Drive, Whitefish. Good evening again. I am afforded another chance to publicly thank you for your service. With the extended length of this process, once again, my family, as the adjacent homeowners to Birch Hill, speaks in opposition to the homeowner's request for a variance to extend their dock. My last correspondence you have received on pages 418, 19, and 20 of the packets. It also should be noted that all members of the Birch Hill community do not support this request. And I state once again that I am a strong advocate of the Whitefish Lake and Lakeshore Protection Regulations and do hope that all involved in this request have read them cover to cover and understand the purpose. The Birch Hill request simply does not meet the criteria for undue hardship. This was brought forward in both the planning staff report and the Lakeshore Protection Committee report. Whether a right or wrong decision is made here tonight, the issue has opened for resolution an older concern regarding lake frontage ownership in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to the council now for either a motion or comments. Rebecca.
I'll make a motion to deny.
There is a motion on the table to deny the request for a minor lakeshore variance. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Fury. Rebecca, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I trust our planning staff and the Lakeshore Protection Committee, and also I don't really think it's a sufficient hardship. I am not sure that it will change the use pattern much of how the residents will use it, but I don't feel comfortable creating more unsafe navigation issues out in that area.
Further comments from the council? Andy.
I'll just make a couple of quick ones. I don't buy all of the riparian property line extending all the way across the lake arguments, I'll have to admit, even though I looked at all the arrows, every one of them. And, but I do believe our planning staff made the right call, and I believe that the Lakeshore Protection Committee did make the right call. And I think one of the things for me is this application was made so they can add 2 boats. And we add length to docks for depth issues, and that was not what the application and the variance request was for. It was simply so they could add 2 more boats. And so that, to my mind, says like, well, we're just adding more boats and we're not really concerned about our depth here. And I don't know that at that point how far they could go out before they'd get past their I think it was 3 feet 8 inches at low water, which was not the case this year. If I went out there and measured, it would have been over 4 feet, I guarantee you. And I think part of, which is, I'm guessing, probably why 143 feet was the number in 2007, when we tended to have a little bit higher water levels. And I think the last few years to kind of judge it off of that for water levels is probably, I'm actually hoping that's not the path going forward for us. So I will support the motion.
Further comments from the council? Steve.
Yeah, I just want to support findings 1 and 2 of the staff report. In order for a variance to be met, 4 criteria must be met. It's not, that's very clear in our city code, that this is due to an unusual hardship. I mean, this is due to an unusual circumstance that would result in an undue hardship. I don't see that. There is a dock there. In this time of year, there's not enough water to swim, and I get that, but that's not an undue hardship because it's been there, it's already existing, and it's longer than it's supposed to be. And then finding number 2 deals with variance number 2, that no reasonable alternatives exist which do not meet the standards herein. And it's clearly delineated that there is the possibility of changing the shape of the dock. So those 2 things are pretty clear. Whether it creates a navigation issue or have an adverse impact, I'm not sure about that, but the other 2 are pretty darn clear to me.
Thank you, Steve. Further comments from the council? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks to both parties for attending both last meeting as well as this evening. We'll move on to item 8A. You have Dana's report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Dana? Dana, I have one.
Yes.
What is the Flathead Basin Commission planning to present to the council?
Oh, you just, what is it? It might not be next meeting. Yeah, we might be changing the meeting date. I can't recall. Craig, what was, do you remember? I can't remember. It's on my
That's
email.
okay.
But it'll be something, it's maybe not scheduled for the next meeting now because it was going to be this evening, I think. Or was it going to always be next evening? Okay. Not quite sure yet.
Okay. Dana, anything else to report on?
I'm just gonna give a quick update on the bear-resistant container rollout. We know that we are having some challenges with this rollout. Republic Services is having challenges, and so we just ask that our customers be patient with our utility billing staff. They are doing the best they can. We're not getting responses very quickly back from Republic, so we've been definitely trying to work with them and help be that middle person, I guess, working with our customers directly. But I will say, though, we do have a bear special event that we are planning, and that will hopefully, assuming I approve the special event permit, will be on October 8th at Depot Park from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and there'll be more notice that'll go out to the public. But you can come, you can learn about the new bear carts, meet with city staff. We got Republic Services, FWP. You've got Kodiak, who is the provider of the containers. We have the bear dogs are going to be there for demonstrations, and you can learn to use bear spray, because that is something that Justine with FWP and I talked about. There are bears that are in our valley right now. Columbia Falls is dealing with a lot more issues than we are, but carrying bear spray in town is actually an okay thing. Trying to scare the bears away if they are trying to access garbage cans right now is really important. Banging pots and pans, she said. Whatever you can do, yelling at them, clapping at them. We're lucky because Whitefish has more of a black bear population than grizzly population, which is what Columbia Falls is facing right now. So with that, though, I think what a great time to show that we need this rollout to happen, and we hope to have it done, really it's supposed to be done by December. And we're keeping that alley service, so that's all I have.
Thanks, Dana. We'll start, we have 2 letters enclosed with the packet. Are there any comments on Jan or the Stanley family's letters?
I'll be brief. Deer are a major problem in this town, and we need to start working with FWP to sort some of this out.
Okay. Further comments on the letters? Frank?
I would concur, and I do not share the Stanley family's concerns regarding bear-proof containers. This is the right thing, the right time. We should have done this a long time ago. We may not have had this problem if we had been able to do it. Got to get it done. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Frank. We'll start with councilor comments, and we'll go left to right this evening. Andy, any comments this evening?
I'll make a couple bear container comments. Our neighborhood got our cans on Friday, and the guys from Republic were super nice. They came out in a truck and they picked it up, but it was when we were supposed to be getting our cans up the hill, and so everybody scrambled, and we got our old cans out and we got our new cans. I flew home from a work trip last Thursday, and with the holiday on Monday, everybody was delayed a day. I came down Labrie at 1 in the morning, and of course, everybody left their can out, thinking, oh, it was going to get picked up. Every can was down, and there was garbage everywhere. A bear took down my plum tree twice this weekend, once on Friday night and once on Saturday. I thought I got all the plums picked off on Saturday, but there was still just enough there. So the plum tree went back up. So people that think we don't have a bear problem, they have something else coming. The one thing I will say about the cans, and I think this is something that Republic needs to let everybody know, and they maybe will get better as they get older. If you just shut that lid down, they don't necessarily latch. You have to push that thing down. And that, I noticed mine's a little better now because I messed around with it a whole bunch, but that's something people are going to have to be aware of, because I'm afraid that there's going to be a lot of cans in the alleys that people go out quickly, they'll just throw it and they won't push it and it won't click, and it'll just be like any other can. So none of that, that's all I have.
Thanks, Andy. Rebecca?
Yeah, I just have a couple questions about Edgewood, Craig, and some of the neighbors are concerned about the weeds proliferating and the landscaping that they were left with. Is that being corrected, or how should we have another meeting with the neighbors, or?
No, I don't think we need to meet with the neighbors again. We're gonna have to redo that. By the time it got seeded this summer, it was into like the first week of July, and we allowed the contractor to do it, knowing that if he didn't do it, it was going to be entirely weeds. But
just, it happened in my neighborhood when my street was reconstructed. We all of a sudden had every yard had noxious weeds, and they're still there. And I'm wondering, how is it possible that we pay people to put in lawn and what we get is noxious weeds when we have a noxious weeds ordinance? And like, I just hope it's not happening on every project, you know? So I just think the neighbors are upset about how it's turned out. I know you know that because they think you're wonderful and you're doing a great job intermediating. That's why I keep bringing up possibly auditing through the Resort Tax Committee the end result, so that if we keep using the same type of contractor, maybe we need to look at how people that are actually living with our product are experiencing that. The second thing is I went to the landfill and I found out that they are doing, the landfill's not doing plastics, but there is one place in the valley that is actually accepting plastics. So when we talk about recycling, I think we should kind of look at that as a possibility too. And then the last thing is, I have my bear proof container too, and I've been talking online, I've been talking to our bear management specialist, Justine, and I think what's going to happen is everybody needs to be more careful in town, because my neighbor who lives right next to the river, she had her garage open and the garbage can was open, and she looked over and this huge black bear was 10 feet from her. So we never used to see them in the middle of the day, but now we're seeing them during the middle of the day every day. And they're not alarmed by dogs. They're not really alarmed by people. I think they have been eating our scented food for so long that they're just hungry. So we kind of have to maybe pull out our hiking skills a little bit. But I'm really thankful that we got them, and I agree with Andy, you do have to push down on them to get them to latch. They won't just latch if you drop them. So thanks. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Rebecca. Frank? Thank you, Frank. Steve?
Just a couple things. I do want to circle back to the page 134 of the transportation plan and give you a suggestion for language there. And so in that, on the right-hand side, under shared use path, it says in the second sentence, it says paths should be 10 feet wide whenever possible, semicolon, paths 8 feet in width may be allowed for low traffic situations. What I would suggest is just strike from whenever possible all the way to whereas paths 12 to 14 feet in width are recommended, because that falls in line with the AASHTO recommendations directly, rather than having that stuff about 8 feet in there. Okay, that's just my suggestion. I guess if we see that language next time, we can vote on it. And then I also wanted to there was a comment I didn't make about the transportation plan and postponing it again. I just wanted to circle back to it, and it's regarding some of your comments, Giuseppe, about these two different plans. And I think we just need to be careful in understanding that process and how it all played out, and the fact that, and the work that Craig is now doing to try to resurrect the pieces that we do agree on. Your characterization was that we would start rebuilding the road with our own funding because we're at a disagreement with the state. At least that's the way it came across to me, and I don't think that's at all accurate of what we're trying to do. And I think Craig laid it out pretty clearly today when he showed us the diagram that had the two red rectangles on it that showed the places where we do agree, and trying to move forward with projects now that will meet those needs, and then we can deal with the one section that we don't agree on, or the two sections, I guess, downtown and north of 7th Street later. So, and I just want to commend you, Craig, for circling back to that and taking another look at that, rather than just washing our hands of it and saying, well, the state disagreed with us, so we're done and we're not going to do anything. I appreciate the fact that you've come back to that and are working to find a solution to at least get started on those things. And that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Giuseppe?
Well, after Rebecca's comment, I picture you as Mr. Wonderful Craig. So I have this picture in my mind. Just one comment about the Whitefish Business Transition Zone. Twice it's been brought up to the regular city council meeting. Dave Taylor and the team did a lot of work to propose that, for lack of better terms, zoning overlay, and we tabled it once, we brought it back up twice. My motion to approve it died for the lack of a second, and I think we should give staff directions one way or another to either drop it or to decide if we need to have another work session, because I asked Dave, and some developers or some private individuals are coming, and they will develop in city-county zoning, or whatever, is it WB2 right now, Dave, by default?
That's the county equivalent is the
Correct.
WB2, right?
So I'm honestly puzzled at the fact that there was an important task council asked the city to perform, and so far we haven't closed the circle on that.
I'll take that as a suggestion. Is the council interested in reviving the transitional zoning district in the Highway 40 area? Showing of hands in some form or fashion? I would as well. I think it's what we need to do. We can't turn a blind eye to it and pretend nothing's going to happen.
A work session, probably?
Yes,
Is
please.
what we're talking about? Okay.
Kind of a refresh.
I
Thank
saw
you,
four
Giuseppe.
hands.
Yep, you have your approval. Giuseppe, anything further? Great, thank you. I'd like to give a big happy birthday to our planning director, Dave Taylor. Hope you had a good evening. A reminder of the Chamber's Oktoberfest, please get out and support the Chamber. I believe Locals Night is this Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. So it's already September. And I believe it carries to next weekend as well. So please get out and enjoy town and support your local chamber. And I'd like to welcome Don Herring to the Lakeshore Committee. He was appointed prior to our regular meeting this evening. That's all I had. Dana, anything further from staff? We are adjourned. Thanks.